Oregon, despite winning the game earlier this year, they are a 2.5-point dog in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State. Over-under in this game, 53.5. It's worth talking about Ohio State coming out of that game. And I said going in, if Ohio State would just cut it loose, let the receivers make plays, they were going to win that game and probably win it convincingly. I wasn't convinced that they would do it. How much of the game plan against Michigan was like an ego thing? We got to out-physical Michigan. We got to wrestle back the physicalness of this rivalry. It's hard to say. It seems like in retrospect that was part of it. But Ohio State reminded us, and you guys mentioned it on Saturday, like when they are utilizing the talent that they have, that was the team that can win a national championship. That was the team that we were talking about as a super team in August that hasn't really looked like it besides some little pieces. And so that makes this matchup really, really interesting for a lot of reasons. So, Chris, I guess we'll start there. When you look at the first game, you look at this game, what jumps out to you as things that are going to inform what this Big Ten rematch in a Big Ten Pac-12 spiritual Rose Bowl plays out?
Yeah, we got a traditional Rose Bowl here. I'm really excited about that. I think, these two teams played each other in Eugene earlier in the year. Oregon wins by 1. Will Howard slides and the clock runs out. But even before that, there's a Jeremiah Smith offensive pass interference that pushed him out of field goal range. We're, one play away from Ohio State winning that game. So that really could have gone either way. As for the game itself, what jumped out to me the first time these two teams played back in Eugene is that they both ran the ball pretty well against each other.
Yeah.
And they're not that great of rushing teams. They're both outside the top 25 in yards per carry. Mm-hmm. They both ran the ball well. Ohio State ran the ball pretty well against Tennessee, used Travion Henderson in the passing game as well. And so, it's going to be a theme for all of these quarterfinals, and I think it was in the first round too. Whoever's playing better defense and running the ball better, that's I think kind of who's going to win this game and who's going to do a better job of that. I don't know. It's close. That Ohio State team that we saw against Tennessee, that's the team I picked at the beginning of the year to go 16-0 and win the national championship. Mm-hmm. They stumbled. Can they continue that, or is it going to be kind of back and forth where maybe they can't run the ball here? That's what's going to come down to me, running the ball.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting, producer Cam notes that Will Howard averaged 12.9 yards of completion against Tennessee. That's his best number against a ranked team since playing at number 9 Oklahoma State in 2022 at 14 yards at a completion. I do think we mentioned this in our in my preview with Cam Teague, our Ohio State writer. I do think because the defense is so good and because game style does matter, I do think that there have been games this year where Ohio State walks in and they say, it's going to take 24 for us to win. And I think that the offensive strategy builds around that. You can see it. You can see, well, we're comfortable. Well, we don't want to take chances. Well, if it's 4th and 2 and we're on our own 40 and it's 3-0 in the second quarter, we might have a better team, but we're going to punt it away. I think when you enter a game like this, and I think this is to Ohio State's advantage, what number would make you feel comfortable, Chris? 38 maybe? If you just start the game?
I think 30, 31, 34.
Something like that. Either way. And I think that affects your strategy. And the irony is that that's when Ohio State is at its best, when it feels a little pressure, when it has to be aggressive, when it's tucked in, and when it's playing so conservative. It gets ugly because the offensive line not only was not very good, is already banged up, has lost our cigar-smoking friend, Seth McLaughlin, on the sideline. They're not going to be able to run the ball super, super well. I think some of the stuff, the balance that they had against Tennessee allowed them to run the ball. Also, Tennessee's defensive line just didn't show up. Weird game for them. James Pierce Jr., non-factor. I do wonder, that sack on the opening drive that was the face mask. I think it was Bryson Easton was called for that. Their defensive tackles didn't play very well. I do wonder if that changes some things. I think Tennessee, got behind the chains a lot offensively, got behind on the scoreboard, and wasn't able to kind of be themselves. But ultimately, Ohio State walked in that game, I think, thinking they had to score 30 or something along those lines to win that game. And, who would have known that having Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith to throw to and using them would be a huge asset? And I think you got to see them do that again.
Ohio State was throwing on first down in that game more than they have all season. And that's what I said going in. You have to throw to set up the run because you're not going to be able to run. They also went back to their bread and butter of third and short situations. We're running flood outs, quick hitches out into a receiver in the flat and going that way. And I think that's what they're going to do here. They're going to have to stay with that aggressiveness. And I think they will. I think they will in this game.
Yeah, we should probably talk about Oregon. We haven't seen them in a little bit. They haven't. I mean, have they played like a real marquee game since then? I mean, I guess the Big Ten championship game, but that it's been interesting to watch them. This will be a really fascinating test. And I thought Ohio State was the better team in the first game. Was it just me? It felt like Oregon winning that game was like kind of amazing the way that they played.
I thought it was pretty even. I mean, that could have gone either way. I wouldn't say one team was dramatically better than the other because
Not
Dillon
dramatically
Gabriel,
better, but I felt like Ohio State deserved to win the game.
Dillon Gabriel, that was one of the best games he's ever played in his life. He completed 68% of his passes, 341 yards, 2 touchdowns, no turnovers, ran for 32 yards and another touchdown. Like Dillon Gabriel, I know he was a Heisman finalist, but he might be one of the least talked about kind of Heisman finalists we've had in a while. He is the best quarterback in the playoff, even if you don't feel like that great about him. But in every big game this year, he has played really, really well. I just listed off the Ohio State game stats. Illinois, ranked team, 291 passing yards, 70% completions, 3 touchdowns. Michigan, 294 passing yards, 65% completions with a touchdown. Big Ten championship, 283 yards, 69% completions, 4 touchdowns. He has been at his best in the biggest games. And I think we're probably going to get another good Dillon Gabriel game here. We can kind of really start to talk about as maybe this guy was the best quarterback in the country this season.
I kind of like Ohio State in this one just because, like we talked about, like this is the team. If they are the team that we were talking about as a super team, which they looked a lot like that against Tennessee, I don't think it's an overreaction for them to do this. I don't think it's they looked this way against Tennessee. We're going to forget how they looked in 10 games. I think it's a combination of being really motivated, figuring out, hey, when we're aggressive, we're better, and then feeling like you probably have to be aggressive. You're not going to feel good about scoring 20 points and beating Oregon. You're going to have to let Will Howard let it rip, and that's when this team's at their best because they don't run the ball very well. You got really good backs, but your line's not good.
Dave's been Buckeye pilled, man. He saw them.
I have been.
This guy, it's like he's throwing absolutely everything out the window. Like we're forgetting. Like we're talking about, Ohio State's figured it out. They're the most talented team in the country. They're pissed off. Let's not forget they ride the roller coaster just like this.
Yeah.
They were up here at the beginning of the season. They were down here. Even when they beat Penn State, they were down here. Then they go back up when they beat the hell out of Indiana. Will Howard's putting out cigarettes on the sideline. Then they lose by
awesome.
just like they did during the game against Michigan and after. And then they go right back up. So it's just like who are you going to get? Like, Ubben, I agree with a lot of things. I think all three of us and a lot of people across the country can agree. If Ohio State plays the way that they did against Tennessee, I would pick them against anybody. But how can we be confident that that's the Ohio State team that we're going to see? How can we expect that that's going to be the team that's going to show up every single round of the playoffs, especially against a team that's already had your number this year? I mean, It was pretty evenly matched. It was one of those games where it was 2 really good teams and the ball just bounces one way, a play here, a play there, and it favored Oregon. But let's not forget, as Ohio State has rode ebbs and flows and done this all season long, Oregon has just kind of done this and this. And it hasn't been like a steep angle, but it's been a slow upward trajectory of getting better each and every single week. So, and this is not me revealing my pick. This is just me asking a general question. Do you go with the team that shows you who they are every single week, which is a consistent team that is really, really good, really hard to beat? You're going to have to play a perfect game to beat them. Or do you go with a team that's like, okay, well, when they're on, they're national champions. When they're not, they're worse than Michigan. Like, how do you... Like how are you so confident of it? That's all I want to know. I really think the Michigan game was a game planning issue. I really do think, Ryan Day's not going to say it. I think that in his head, he was like, the last 3 years have basically made my life hell, and people think we're soft, which I don't even think is necessarily true. But I think people thought that Michigan was more physical, and I think they wanted to. There's something about that rivalry and ego thing that no, we're going to push you around, and then when you couldn't, they're like, well, we're going to keep pushing you around. And they still couldn't. And like, well, we're going to keep trying to push you around. And they just didn't work. And then it was too late. And then your whole team's tight. And they feel like they're going to lose. And Michigan's got nothing to lose. I do think this game does get decided by the tackles. For whatever reason,
Ohio State's tackles played really, really well against Tennessee, and they're going to be tested against Oregon. Mateo Uiagalelei, Jordan Burch combined for 19 sacks. Johnny Cornelius at Oregon, their right tackle, he's got the 7th most pressures allowed among starting Power 4 tackles with at least 800 snaps. He's given up 18 and tied for the 8th with the most pressures. So I think overall, like, it's going to be that those matchups are going to decide this, because you got to protect. And you look at what Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau can do. They tore up Tennessee's tackles, who were not very good. Lance Hurd and John Campbell. I think Campbell, guy that's an LSU transfer, I believe they benched him at one point in the second half. And I think the tackles are going to decide this, because they're going to have to protect. Because I think you're right, Chris. I don't think these two teams are going to be able to run the ball very well. We said that last week. Tennessee absolutely didn't run the ball well, in part because they lost Dylan Sampson, at like the second play of the game.
That was a factor.
That didn't help. It didn't help.
Hold on, because Jordan James had almost 100 yards and 2 touchdowns against Penn State, who does have a better rush defense than Ohio State. So
yeah,
I'm not gonna go. I'm not just gonna agree with you and say, oh well, neither of these teams are gonna be able to run the ball. Like,
so I do wonder,
right.
like,
you may be right.
I do wonder, like, elements wise, how is that going to go? I mean, they played at night in Eugene before. The Penn State game, where Oregon was really good on offense, bad on defense, was neutral indoor conditions. If the weather's good and normal at the Rose Bowl, like, that could kind of make these offenses work a little bit better. An under the radar player I'm going to watch in this game, Ohio State's tight end Guy Scott Jr., I think.
Yeah, they look for him a lot.
He has just 20 catches on the year, but his 2 biggest games were the Oregon game. He had 3 catches for 46 yards, and he had 4 catches against Tennessee this last week. I do not think Oregon is going to play single corner coverage against Jeremiah Smith and Ibuka on the outside. I think it's going to try to be more like Michigan and try to bracket, especially Smith, and have somebody else beat you. I think Guy Scott, the tight end at Ohio State, may end up having a big game.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about these two coaches really quickly before we get our official predictions. Ryan Day, I think, has calmed any idea that, like, people are going to be calling for his job. There's still going to be a lot of grumbling. I think anything short of a national championship until the Michigan game next year, until he beats them, there's going to be grumbling. There's going to be questions about him at the highest level. But if you win this game, that goes a long way. I do think if you're Dan Lanning and you win this game, and maybe if you win a national championship, to me, if Dan Lanning wins a championship, or even maybe even gets to the championship, other than Kirby, is he like the number 2 guy now?
I think if he gets there. Yeah. If he doesn't, if he loses this game,
big questions.
we're gonna come back to the conversation that went away earlier in the year, which was, how does Dan Lanning do in the biggest games?
Yeah.
He has been losing them.
The Washington stuff last year was concerning for me.
Now, by the smallest of margins in some of these games, they're just on the short end of this. But if you lose to a team you already beat and you don't get out of the quarterfinals, as much as I said this may be an advantageous time to play them, if you're the number 1 seed undefeated and you don't make it out of the quarterfinals, no matter who you played, that's tough. That's a tough look. That becomes the Dan Lanning. He can recruit and get talent and get the best one of the best rosters in the country. They're doing it again next year. If you've seen what Oregon's bringing in the portal, they're about to be really good next year again. But can Dan Lanning get him over the hump? You beat Ohio State twice in one season, the same thing Washington did to you last year, then I think Dan Lanning gets in that conversation. I think just by winning this game, really. I think we get that conversation if he gets the win in the quarterfinal.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, Oregon sits at home, watches Ohio State host. Meanwhile, Texas gets to host the field, and then gets to host the worst team in the field, and then goes and gets to play the second worst team in the field on a neutral field.
And if they win, Texas will be in the Cotton Bowl.
Yeah.
In Dallas.
There's a reason why I picked the Horns to get there. We'll see. Let's do our picks real quick. Dame, I feel like you're feeling the Ducks right now.
Well, I've been on both sides of the fence. I do want to, because Chris, he gave a player to watch for, so I want to give a matchup to watch for real quick.
Okay.
My pick. Tej Johnson and Igbenogson, DB from Ohio State. That one-on-one matchup right there is going to feed families for eternity. You've got one of the best corners in the country, one of the fastest, quickest, most twitchiest receivers. Honestly, Tej Johnson, like I saw him live at the Big Ten Championship, he looked like one of the best receivers, if not the best. Like just from watching him and seeing him play in person, like he looked like he might want to throw his name in the best receiver in the country category. But my pick as far as the game, like I have to go with the team. I've said this about Oregon before, but I've got to go with the team where I trust the coach the most, where I trust the quarterback the most. Truly, I trust the running game the most, and that's going to be Oregon. I think that obviously they knocked off Ohio State before. I think with the roller coaster that Ohio State rides, I'm not sure which version is going to show. If I could guarantee you it was going to be the Ohio State that played against Tennessee, that might change my pick, but I'm not sure that that's going to be the team. So Oregon's been more consistent. Like I said, they've been on that slow upward trajectory all year long. I'm going to go with the Ducks.
I think I'm doing you a favor, Damien, by not telling Ohio State that they suck. So you're probably going to end up being.
Well, nobody ever said. Hold on. Nobody ever said Ohio State sucked. Like there's a difference between.
I don't know. I think a lot of Ohio State fans said we suck.
There's a difference between saying you suck and saying you are absolutely not living up to expectations. Yeah. Now, I can't speak for Ohio State fans because I'm not a Buckeye. I've never been a Buckeye. I'm from Kentucky. I'm not from Ohio. Two different types of people. But from me, from us, it's always just been you are not who you say you are.
I will say, I was thinking about this over the weekend. The Ohio State loss to Michigan this year, I think in the last 20 years, that's one of the 5 to 10 worst losses in the sport. I think in terms of its mental fit. I think for me, number one of all time is 13-9. It doesn't get worse than that. I think
that's Pitt, West Virginia,
Pitt,
2007.
In 2007. The second worst one is Iowa State beating Oklahoma State in double overtime in 2011. Those are the two that I don't think will ever be rivaled for a lot of reasons we don't have time to get into on the pod. But I do think in all the circumstances and everything that went into that, the Ohio State-Michigan loss, I think is probably in the 5 to 10 range ultimately. Okay. Chris, who you got in this one?
I'm picking Oregon. I've picked Oregon to win the national championship. I think it's going to be a close game. Please, for the love of God, be a close game.
We'll talk more about that later. Yeah,
but I do think these are two of the three best teams playing.
Yeah,
and hopefully it's a good game. But I think Oregon's just more consistent. They're rested. They got the time zone advantage here. I'm going with Oregon.